Similarly, negative numbers, it's absurd. When there is nothing, there is no reason to represent it. And then when there is even less than nothing, why would you ever want to deal with it? That was the attitude of the Europeans. But in India, you can see that because they were trying to understand solving equations, you can see that there is great comfort level with working with negative numbers. And in fact, they talk about it in terms of debt and income to deal with positive and negative numbers. And also, you can see that they are comfortable in talking about irrational numbers. Let me remind you what irrational numbers are. You know that the rational numbers, this is a subset of real numbers. They are dense in real numbers, and they are represented by numbers of the form P and Q, where Q is not zero, and P and Q are integers. They can also be negative. And irrational numbers are everything in the real numbers which are not rational. Like, for instance, I hope all of you know this, pi is irrational. Similarly, the natural logarithm with respect to base e, these are all irrational numbers. And irrational numbers, when you take the decimal expansion, it doesn't have a pattern. It just goes on endlessly and there is no pattern. And these are irrational numbers. And the Greeks were totally afraid of irrational numbers. In fact, until that point, the Greeks were giving importance to geometry and number theory. But when they were confronted with irrational numbers, and it's very easy, you have to come across irrational numbers. So for instance, if you take a right angle triangle whose sides have length 1 unit, say. So this is 1 unit. And this is also 1 unit. Then the length of this becomes square root of 2 by what is today called Pythagoras theorem. But again, Pythagoras was also one who discovered it, but this was known to many, many civilizations much before Pythagoras. So square root 2 is an irrational number. And when the Greeks came across irrational numbers, they couldn't deal with it. They just said, this is the work of the devil. And in fact, there's a story that the people who knew that irrational numbers were inevitable, that they existed, they were forbidden to talk about it because they felt that it would lead to chaos in society. And so therefore, nobody should know about irrational numbers. But the Indians had a totally different attitude. And I think that was largely because they were happy in dealing with abstraction. So they said, okay, so what? Square root of 2, it has to exist, it exists. So we have to deal with it. There are so many things we don't understand in this world, like the ways of God, and this is one of them. So this didn't bring a halt to their thinking. They lived with irrational numbers. Whereas if you look at Greeks' engagement with numbers, you can see that at this point, there's a halt. They almost stop working with numbers and start working more with geometry. And also you realize that in the 7th century, Indians also knew how to solve quadratic equations, solving quadratic equations and dealing with square roots. All of this, you know that they were comfortable with it already by the 7th century. And then the next major figure that one has to mention is Bhaskaracharya, who was around the 12th century. And again, all of this today, you can call them as algebra. So Bhaskaracharya also made great contributions, what in today's language could be called algebra, but also number theory. So his contributions are no less important. And you can see that there's a continuity, so even though we don't know the history because many of the manuscripts are missing or we don't have the originals, but there are references to manuscripts and you know that somehow knowledge traveled all across India. There were many of them. One of them lived in Magad, one of them lived somewhere in the north, but somehow knowledge traveled and there are references within this. And what is also interesting is already in the Vedas, you see the mention of large numbers already in the Vedas, which again, nobody knows how old they are. Already in the Vedic age, in the Vedas, there are mentions of huge numbers, large numbers in the sense, really large. And again, that shows that they already knew that there is this concept of infinity. And the number of representations of large numbers, it's again interesting. In the Vedas, you see them as multiples of 30, huge, really large multiples of 30, 60, or even 10 to the power huge numbers, where this exponentiation is really large. So you also realize that they knew that representing numbers with base 10 exponentiation, all this makes representation easier. And they had names for all these large numbers, which again is fascinating. And then later on, now Sir mentioned calculus and trigonometry. And today we again think all of this came from the West, but this is not at all true. Many other civilizations knew about it, in particular the Indian civilization. And today we know that already in the 13th century, there was the Kerala School of Astronomy and Mathematics. And it's interesting how they combine these two. One of the reasons they combined these two was to draw up calendars. And the calendars are so precise. And in fact, there's a lot of research that one needs to do even to understand how did they get it so precise. I'm not an expert, so I don't want to say more about it, but it's really a fascinating area of research to see the different calendars. In India, as you all know, we have different systems of calendars. There's a lunar calendar, there's a solar calendar, and then there's also the solar lunar calendar combined. And all of these involved very intricate calculations using astronomy and mathematics in the form of trigonometry. And today there are people who think that this knowledge probably traveled from India to the West, to Europe, because calculus made its appearance in Europe only much later, in the 18th century. Newton, Leibniz, and so on. It was much later. And people suspect that there must have been an Indian connection, because there were the Jesuits who were traveling all the way to Asia and going back and so on. So they probably carried that knowledge back. So again, this is a fascinating area of research to be done, and there's more to be discovered there. And one name that we should mention in this school, Kerala school, is Madhava, of whom we know quite a bit because there is literature recording where he was from and what he contributed and so on. He lived in a place called Sangamagrama. And there are lots of things. I mean, Madhava, for instance, he knew how to deal with sequences and series. Whereas Euler, who came much later in Europe, he was still uncomfortable. What does it mean to add infinitely many numbers? What does it mean for a sequence to converge? You can see that their foundations at that time, they were still shaky in the 17th century. But in India, there is evidence to believe that already in the 13th century, they had a fairly intuitive grasp of what it means for a sequence to converge, what it means for infinite series expansions, and so on. So for instance, yeah, so he was in the 14th century, just to give you a timeline. And for instance, he definitely knew of this infinite expansion for pi by 4 as an alternating series. And similarly, he also knew of the expansion for sin x, which we all know, right, today. So on, and similarly cos x. And without all of these, it would have been impossible to make such precise calendars. So even to investigate what they knew and how they made such precise calendars combining astronomy and trigonometry and mathematics, that's an area of research. And we need to reclaim many of those and make these accessible to the broader public. Because today, one of the problems is we think, there are two extremes. One extreme is we think everything came from the West. We knew nothing. Or the other extreme is everything came from India. We knew everything. Neither of this is fully true. The truth is somewhere in between, and it calls for serious historical research to actually find out what came from where, what were the connections, what was the way knowledge traveled, and so on. For instance, there is enough evidence to show that the Arabs by the 10th century knew much more in some aspects of geometry and algebra. And it traveled both to India and also to Europe. And similarly, there were exchanges from India, which probably went through Arab civilization to Europe. But all of this calls for serious scholarship to really tease out what was known and what was the contribution and so on. Okay, so I already mentioned, so let me just mention here that many texts are missing, original texts, but they are referenced. Some of these are now being translated, especially those relating to the Kerala school. Many original texts are missing, but you find references, but are referenced in later years, later centuries. And of course, one other name I should mention is Aryabhatta, Brahmagupta, Bhaskaracharya, and Madhava. These are the four names. And I also already touched upon mathematics in the Vedas, mathematical knowledge in the Vedas. I don't want you to confuse this with Vedic mathematics. I know nothing about Vedic mathematics. Vedic mathematics is something that's in the last century. Whereas when I refer to mathematical knowledge in the Vedas, I have in mind dealing with large numbers. In the Vedas, there are all these ratios and proportions. What is Brahma's day? What is one day in Brahmaloka? What is 1 year in Brahmaloka? And then how long the ratio between 1 day on earth and 1 day in Brahmaloka. And similarly, huge numbers, samvatsaras. What does it mean for a samvatsara? What does it mean for a yuga? All of these are really large numbers, and there is evidence to show that they were very comfortable in dealing with large numbers. So this is what I mean when I say mathematical knowledge in the Vedas. And I want to give you a few references for those of you who are interested. I'm not at all an expert in this, and it's something that I am constantly learning myself. So here are some references for those of you who are interested. So the first one is an article by Professor Dani, who was in TIFR, who was in Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, by S.G. Dani. This is an article that appeared in the Hindu. You can Google this and you'll find this article. And there's another very nice article by Professor Amartya Kumar Datta. This is in the Indian Academy of Sciences. Again, this is available on Google. You can just Google this, Mathematics in Ancient India. And another one, this is fascinating article. This is Professor Sridharan, who was my advisor. So he's my academic grandfather in some sense, a great scholar, a lovely human being. And he has written some fascinating articles about how meter, the jo bolte hai Hindi mein chandas, because India, you should remember, was an oral civilization. Much more than a written civilization, there was a lot that was preserved orally. And then remembering it was by learning things by heart, and preserving that knowledge meant you had to recite it precisely. And then it was a kind of encoding. So chandas, the meter becomes important. And there is a lot of mathematics in that to check whether you're reciting it properly or not. So this is an article which is called Mathematics in Ancient and Medieval India. And similarly, there's a lot of mathematics in music, in the different ragas, in the different rhythms, in the talas and so on. So Professor Sridharan has done some fascinating research in these areas, and I would highly encourage all of you to read his articles. Okay, so now let's come back to pi, this number, which we know is irrational. And one of the fascinating problems since a long time is to find the decimal expansion for pi. You know that it's an irrational number, so it's going to keep expanding, millions of digits. And then you'll always find somebody who can recite the digits up to the first 20,000, 30,000, 1 million, 100,000, etc., etc. And at the time of Ramanujan, now we are coming back. Well, what I want to talk about is approximations to pi. So we all know that it's a rational number. So we know that 22/7 is only an approximate value to this, right? It's not exactly 22/7 because 22/7 is a rational number, whereas we know that pi is an irrational number. So 22/7 is an approximation to pi. And then one of the questions is, how can we find better and better approximations? So what we usually do in class is we use 3.14 as an approximation, but then this decimal points keep going on. So, and each time you expand the decimal points, then you get better and better approximations to pi. And just to give you a timeline, at Aryabhatta's time, which was around 5th century, the known approximation, which was quite common, was 3.1416. But in 5th century, I doubt if any other civilization, especially the Western civilization, knew even this approximation, because like I mentioned, they were so uncomfortable with irrational numbers. And then there was Madhava in the 14th century. By then, the approximation already goes much better. It goes up to 10 digits. And then there was Nilakantha, who was 1500 AD. So slightly later. So he gives this better approximation, 355 by 130. So all of this you can already, so of course, before this, there was Archimedes, who had an approximation, but many of these approximations are better than Archimedes' approximation. And then there was Somayajin. I'm just mentioning some names at random. This was again in the 15th century, by which time this gets better and better. It goes up to 17 decimal places. 141592653589799324. So it goes up to 17 decimal places. And then there's the fascinating story of Ramanujan. In 1910. So in 1910, we all know Ramanujan's story. He was largely self-taught. He knew these amazing formula. Mathematicians are still trying to understand how he came across these formula. Nobody understands. Even the experts who are working in Ramanujan's area, they know that, okay, this he must have come like this formula he must have derived like this, and so on. But there are so many of his formula for which they have absolutely no idea how he wrote them down. And in all fairness, it should be mentioned that there are a few formulas which he wrote down which are today proved to be wrong. But there are very few. The number of formulas which he wrote down which were correct and which people don't understand how he wrote down far exceed the number of formula which he wrote down which were wrong. And today we know these are, there are modern names for this. So for instance, there are what are called modular functions. These are functions of a complex variable. And it's an important area of research. Modular forms, for instance, are related to modular functions. So he used modular functions to find rapidly converging. He found, in fact, many rapidly converging infinite series expansions for pi. And in fact, if you use one of them, each time you use them, you get 8 more digits. And at that period in 1910, Ramanujan's approximation was the world's best approximation. And as you all know, he went to Cambridge and he was Hardy's student. Hardy was totally puzzled. I mean, how could somebody come up with ideas like this? And he computed up to further 8 decimal places. I just write down the formula. and that will show you how, it's really impossible to explain. And in fact, this is still the algorithmic basis, this formula due to Ramanujan, this infinite series expansions of these bases for computing expansion of pi, the decimal expansion of pi. And let me write down the formula now. So this is 1 over pi is equal to 2 square root of 2 divided by 9801, k equals 0 to infinity, 4k factorial, k upon k factorial to the power 4 times 396 raised to the power 4k. So this infinite series again, now some part of this part, this infinite series, this is what is related to modular functions. Today we know that there's a whole area of research by itself. So the modular functions part come from this. And it's beyond the scope of this lecture to even explain what modular functions are, and nobody knows how he came across this formula. And of course, Ramanujan's other contributions are well known. For instance, his work on partition functions. So what are partition functions? So you take any number n, which is greater than or equal to 1, then you want to know in how many ways you can divide it as a sum. So for instance, you can write 1 as 1. So there's only one way. Now 2, 1 plus 0, right? So 2 can be written as 2 plus 0 and 1 plus 1. 3 can be written as 3 plus 0, 1 plus 2, 1 plus 1 plus 1. So it can be written in 3 different ways. And so the question was, so this is called P of n is the number of ways of partitioning n. Number of ways of partitioning. Isko bolte hain partition. You are partitioning a number as sum. So this is called partition function of partitioning n. So for instance, P of 3 is 3, right? And nobody knew what the formula was for P of n as n grows large. And Ramanujan came up with formulas for P of n as n tends to infinity. And this is an important area of research which builds upon what Ramanujan did. And of course, Ramanujan's whole work, there are researchers working on that even today, and it goes in different areas. So algorithms, it goes into some of his work are related to computers. It's being used in computer science. It's being used in electrical engineering. There are what are called Ramanujan graphs. So it has multiple applications. So Ramanujan's work shows up strangely in a wide range of areas, in different areas, not just within mathematics, both within mathematics and in other subjects, math, and in other areas ranging from computer science, electrical engineering, physics, computer science, physics, theoretical physics, electrical engineering, to mention a few. And it goes on. And I'm sure in the coming years, they'll find more and more connections. So again, nobody understands why that. This is one reason why we say that mathematics is the language of all sciences. What mathematicians do in abstraction later finds applications in so many other areas. For instance, to give you one such example, people were working in prime numbers. Prime numbers goes back at least 5,000 years. You know that different civilizations thought about prime numbers. But today, prime numbers are used in a crucial way in internet security, in cryptography. And why should mathematicians do this 5,000 years ago without ever thinking that one day it will have an application? But that's the very nature of mathematics. You do things in abstraction and then they find applications everywhere. And that's why it's important to always continuously evolve and continuously be at the forefront of advanced mathematics, whether it is abstract or applied. And there is really no strict boundary between pure and applied mathematics. Lots of concepts from pure mathematics are used in applied mathematics. And there are lots of questions which come up in applied mathematics for which you need advances in pure mathematics to make progress in applied mathematics. So they are both sort of linked, but unfortunately we tend to think about them as ye pure hai, ye applied hai. And one of the things I would like to see more is the linkage between the two of them, where not just students of mathematics, but also general society learns that mathematics is used everywhere and there is no end. You know, there is ऐसे नहीं है कि अच्छा अभी हमको सब कुछ मालूम हो गया मैथमेटिक्स में तो सब्जेक्ट खत्म. Never like that, right? I mean, we saw the use of astronomy, trigonometry, and so on. So for instance, much of architecture or electrical engineering or civil mechanical engineering or civil engineering would be impossible without trigonometry today. Measuring the strength of bridges, measuring how to construct bridges, all of these at the base, you have structural mathematics. Now let me come very briefly to India's contributions post-independence. These are the important areas in which India has made contributions. Number theory, and within number theory, you can further divide it into analytic number theory, transcendental number theory, all of this originated in one way or the other in trying to solve equations, but then they became purely different branches of mathematics on their own. And then, of course, there's algebraic number theory, which combines algebra and number theory. And India made rapid progress in all of this, even though we were not directly exposed to advances in these. And post-independence, once TIFR was started, then there was a lot of exchange of mathematicians, students went abroad, there were experts who came and lectured, and this helped build our own strengths. Another area I would really like to mention is algebra and number theory. Sorry, algebra and algebraic number theory. Sorry, algebraic geometry. So algebraic number theory combines algebra plus number theory. It uses algebraic techniques to make advances in number theory. Algebraic geometry similarly uses algebra, commutative algebra, to make advances in abstract algebraic geometry. And today, all of these are combined in what is called arithmetic geometry. And in this, you see algebra coming together with number theory and geometry. And this is a whole new branch by itself. And we have some strengths in that, but we need more. We need more youngsters to stay on top of all these subjects because there are other places where there's rapidly developing. Of course, there's analysis and partial differential equations. India is very strong in these areas as well. And probability and statistics. Okay. Now, these are areas where India is strong, but now mathematics is taking a totally new turn with the advent of computers. And in the coming years, we are going to need expertise in what's called quantum mathematics, quantum computing. And then you must all heard about data science. And now in these times of the pandemic, there's math modeling. And all of these are going to have important applications. They need advance in abstract theoretical mathematics and also in applications. Especially today, we know that climate change, climate forecasting, all of these needs expertise in broad areas of mathematics. And these are the areas where India really needs to focus in the coming years. And for that, and without making advances in this, any amount of computing power, any amount of strong computers will not be useful. There is no point in building better and better computers if you don't know how to feed the right data and how to conclude from the math model that you use. So you have to build the right model, you have to feed the right data, you have to make the right conclusions. And these things are going to become very important in the future, given that, we are facing the problems of climate change, pandemics, and so on. We need to rapidly develop expertise in all of these areas. At the same time, continuing with our strengths. Our strength really is in abstraction. As you saw probably from the beginning of the lecture, I mentioned from the contribution of zero, which was really an abstract concept. At that time, nobody asked, why should you have a symbol for zero? Isse kya fayda hai? What is it good for? Whereas today we know that without zero, any of these advances in number theory would have been absolutely impossible. Just imagine working with numbers like L, M, X, I, V. This is a number, but it'll take you 2 minutes to figure out what number this is, right? So I hope I've convinced you about the continuing legacy of India's contributions and the need for contributing further. And for this, we need young minds, we need young workforce who are interested in mathematics, and they don't somehow think of mathematics as boring, as abstract, usse real life ka kya sambandh hai. ऐसे नहीं है. In fact, Galileo, बहुत साल पहले Galileo ने बोला था, learn math. That is the language in which God has written the universe. And I feel that every 10 years when I think about that statement, I feel, oh, he was so correct. He already knew at that time the importance of mathematics. And in the coming centuries, in the coming decades, mathematics is only going to play a greater and greater role. But the sad part is the larger public is unaware of it. And in India, we need to somehow build that media to make the larger public aware of the importance of mathematics. Also for the policy makers to give importance to mathematics. And finally, industry. Industry needs to employ a lot of mathematics because they need to know that mathematics, when used correctly in industry, industry can also benefit from it. So that's the future of mathematics. So I'll close with saying mathematics, this was legacy and future is important. And with this, let me wish you all a happy National Mathematics Day. Stay engaged with the subject. And whenever somebody tells you mathematics is useless, tell them no, your physics or your chemistry or even your mobile phone, all of this, or your computers would be impossible without mathematics. Mathematics plays a key role in everything that you use. It's only that it is too difficult to communicate how it plays a key role because people are afraid of mathematics and they don't want to pay attention. So let's try to dispel that fear and let's all try to celebrate the beauty of mathematics together. And I'll close with this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sujata ma'am, for your kind words. It's indeed our pleasure to have you for this lecture. We are very grateful.